Welcome to Bookworm's Top Shelf, a show about history's most brilliant books. Today I'd like to introduce you to G.K. Chesterton. He was a rotund, jolly, absent-minded journalist who lived in England around the turn of the century. He wrote hundreds of literary essays on everything from gargoyles to rain to the contents of his trouser pockets. This video is the first in a series on his book Orthodoxy. Judging from that title, you might think it's just a dry theology textbook. But you would be entirely wrong. Orthodoxy is a book of undefinable genre. It's a window into the imagination of a brilliant old soul. It's a manual on how to see magic in everything. It is a map of meaning for the world. It's helpful to think of Chesterton's writing like a meandering trail. It will lead you past many beautiful things, but it's a bit hard to understand where the trail is going while you're on it. But once you reach the summit, you can look down and see how everything is connected. I'll be explaining his work while still trying to keep that rambling, exploratory tone. So don't worry too much about where Chesterton is going. He'll get there eventually. Just explore with him. Without any further preamble, let's talk about the first chapter of Orthodoxy, the Maniac. Chesterton begins his book by describing a conversation he had with a publisher who made some kind of remark to the effect of, "Believe in yourself, and you'll go far." Chesterton replies, "You know who really believes in themselves? Madmen. They believe completely in themselves, and don't listen to anyone else." The publisher isn't exactly sure what to do with that, but he eventually responds, "Well then, what should I believe in if I shouldn't believe in myself?" Chesterton says, "I will go home and write a book in answer to that question." So he did, and he began by continuing to think about going insane. First, he ponders the fact that the world actually seems more exciting and adventurous and wild if you are a normal, average person. If you're the kind of person who fancies himself a tortured genius, everything else seems dull. Fairy tales are generally more fun to read than psychological novels because fairy tales are about a normal person encountering an extraordinary world. The fairy tale discusses what a sane man will do in a mad world. The sober realistic novel of today discusses what an essential lunatic will do in a dull world. Chesterton claims that a logician is more likely to go insane than a poet. Now, he's not saying that logic is bad, he's just saying that if we try to understand everything using only logic, we will go a little crazy. On the other hand, poets don't seek to understand every corner of the universe. They are content to simply wonder at it. Poetry is sane because it floats easily in an infinite sea. Reason seeks to cross the infinite sea and so make it finite. The result is mental exhaustion. The poet only asks to get his head into the heavens. It is the logician who seeks to get the heavens into his head, and it is his head that splits. In fact, Chesterton claims that madmen can be entirely reasonable logicians. Say you have a friend who develops extreme paranoia. He thinks everyone is conspiring against him. He's very good at reasoning out the logical consequences of that belief. He's great at coming up with an internally consistent explanation for why any given person is out to get him. If you try to explain to him that you are in fact not conspiring against him, he will answer, "That's exactly what someone who is conspiring against me would say." Any argument you try to have with him to prove your innocence will just go in a narrow circle. In fact, that is what your friend's mind is doing. It is moving in a very narrow circle. His worldview is complete. He has a consistent logical explanation for everything. It is just a very small and narrow explanation. The problem with your friend is not so much that he is illogical, but that he is unwilling to widen his circle, to include fuller and more beautiful explanations for things. In Chesterton's words, "I admit that your explanation explains a great deal, but what a great many things it leaves out! How much larger your life would be if yourself could become smaller in it. If you could look at other men with common curiosity and pleasure, you would begin to be interested in them, because they were not interested in you." But Chesterton says this sort of insanity, thinking in a tiny circle, also applies to some views of the world that most people would consider completely sane. For instance, materialism. Chesterton is not talking here about our modern tendency to add to cart to solve all our problems, although he does address that form of materialism elsewhere. In this context, materialism, also called scientism, is the view that the only things that really exist are the things that can be scientifically verified. Rocks can be scientifically studied, so we know they exist. Our brains can be scientifically studied, so we know they exist. But our souls do not have a material component. You can't study a soul using chemistry or physics. So according to materialism, souls must not really exist. This kind of materialism leads to nihilism, the belief that since we're all just random hunks of meat, nothing matters or has any meaning. So how is this sort of materialism a kind of insanity? Chesterton says, as an explanation of the world, materialism has a sort of insane simplicity. It has just the quality of the madman's argument. We have at once the sense of it covering everything and the sense of it leaving everything out. The materialist, like our insane friend, can explain everything. He can say that feelings like love and joy are nothing more than chemical reactions in our brains. But he is explaining everything away. He is stuck inside a little circle. His world is completely consistent, but it is small and cramped. Chesterton is not making any claims yet about the truth or untruth of materialism. He's just trying to point out that we can imagine a bigger and better world than the one materialism gives us. A materialist world feels unhealthy. It's like trying to live inside a tiny, cramped box. Believing in a spiritual world feels healthier, more breathable even. If you believe in materialism, you have to throw out your belief in souls and angels and God. Your world becomes smaller and duller. On the other hand, if you believe in a spiritual world, you don't need to throw out your belief in atoms and cells and synapses. Rather, you can go on believing in all those things, but they are now more colorful, more fascinating, and more full of life. Is your brain more interesting as a hunk of meat with electrical impulses that will turn into dust when you die? Or is it more interesting as a wondrous place where something immortal dwells, where the planes of physical, spiritual, and mental existence somehow intersect and merge? Remember, Chesterton is not trying to argue yet that Christianity is true. He's merely asking us to notice that it seems like Christianity gives us a much wider and more beautiful world than the alternatives. In other words, Christianity feels sane. It doesn't force us to explain away parts of reality. Like a fairy tale or a poem, it leaves room for mystery. On the other hand, Chesterton points out that materialism, carried to its logical conclusion, will ultimately cause us to think of ourselves as less than human. Even as the madman who thinks he is a chicken can't enjoy a good book of poetry because he's too worried about keeping his eggs warm, a logically consistent materialist can't enjoy a good book of poetry because he believes that the poem is merely ink on a page describing the sensation of particular neurons in our brains firing. A materialist might think that he has freed himself from God, but in fact he has enslaved himself to a much worse sort of existence. One where nothing has meaning. So how can we break out of our insane circle and breathe the fresh air of the wider world? It will take Chesterton the rest of the book to explain the answer to this question completely, but he will begin by setting up his premises. In order to stay sane, we must be willing to live with some mystery. We must be like the poet that seeks to get his head into the heavens, rather than the logician who tries to get the heavens into his head. Chesterton concludes, the ordinary man has always been sane, because the ordinary man has always been a mystic. He has permitted the twilight. He has always had one foot in earth and the other in fairyland. He has always left himself free to doubt his gods, but, unlike the agnostic of today, free also to believe in them. He has always cared more for truth than consistency. If he saw two truths that seemed to contradict each other, he would take the two truths and the contradiction right along with them. Thus he has always believed that there is such a thing as fate, but such a thing as free will also. He admired youth because it was young, and age because it was not. The whole secret of mysticism is this, that man can understand everything by the help of what he does not understand. We cannot look directly at the sun, but it illuminates everything else. Chesterton says we must learn to think of reality this way. When we try to explain everything, we only explain it away. When we accept some mystery, everything else becomes clear. Now, this is certainly not an argument for leaving life's big questions well enough alone. Chesterton would say we actually have a desperate need for answers to these questions, and he plans to spend the rest of the book elaborating on how the mystic will search for answers while ignoring none of the facts. If that interests you, stay tuned for part 2 of this series on Chesterton's Orthodoxy. Thanks for watching. Bookworm out.